Exactly. And it's actually also the countries that are leading a lot of the wars and causing a lot of the wars across the globe that are also causing the climate crisis, because war is one of the man-made things that exacerbates the climate crisis and the pollution in the air. And so it's really about tackling both issues at the same time and recognizing that they're both stemming from that greed of the people in power, of the people who are benefiting, as you said, from this system. And Faith, I'd like to go to you because you work with the UN Refugee Agency and you've seen a lot of you've seen a lot of communities that have experienced this. And my question is, where do you find your hope?
Yeah, so I mean, I began by saying, or by trying to paint a picture about of how climate change and sort of, um, climate-related issues have impacted and continue to impact not just those who are forced to flee, both refugees and internally displaced people, but also the communities and the countries that host them.
Mm.
But there's a glimmer of hope in terms of what we continue to see in the communities, people really standing up and getting up, to fight climate. I mean, to fight climate change basically, and to play their part in climate action. For example, in Kenya, and you may have seen this story yesterday running on Al Jazeera. There's this Congolese refugee in Kenya's Kakuma camp who's really taking the lead in using green energy through solar power to power homes and businesses, so that people don't have to rely on generator or oil-filled generators to give them a source of light. In Ethiopia, it's the same thing in the Somali region, where there's quite a huge, quite a huge concern for drought. We continue to see refugees grouping themselves in small cooperatives where they use, where they sort of encourage each other and pass those climate action messages, and motivate each other to take certain kind of climate actions in their own community. So, and also just beyond the refugees and the IDPs, we also continue to see national governments really sort of paying attention to really how communities are being affected by the climate crisis. We continue to see governments releasing money or putting aside money from the national budgets to cover emergencies, but also to help communities, and including refugee hosting communities, um, to be able to adapt better when there's sort of a crisis that arises. So I think my hope, as someone who works for UNHCR, someone who has seen firsthand how climate change really affects people who've been forced to flee, is seeing those very people forced to flee really just being at the center of this climate action, climate activities, being agents of their own change, essentially. And I feel that's a lesson that, as Emmanuel has just said, that the international community can really take up more seriously and learn from these people, these displaced communities, refugees, who are really playing their part in ensuring that themselves, their families, their communities, the countries that have hosted them are better protected from further impacts of climate change. I think that's the one sort of call to action I have, to the international community, that you should learn the lessons from the very people experiencing the impacts of climate change.
Exactly. I think that's such an important message, and that's the same message that I carry in a lot of the things that I go on, that the people who are most affected, most impacted, most marginalized, they do not need to be saved. People impacting that are impacted by the climate crisis, we do not need to be saved because there are stories of resistance that are already happening in our countries, in our communities, and these need to be amplified because these stories and voices of resistance are so strong. And it is the people who are most marginalized who will save everyone, who will change the world, who will lead the way to change that we need, the true climate justice, which is really just about having peace. And so, with only a few minutes left, I would like to ask you guys if you could ask one thing of people watching, and Faith already asked her one thing, but you get an extra one. Um, what would it be? What would you ask from the people who are watching, especially those who do not know at the intersections of the climate crisis and the refugee crisis yet? Yusuf, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think the one thing I would ask people to like to do it is just to be with the people and to listen to the people of most affected people. And it's very important if like there are lots of people in the frontline communities who are working against so many things, who are like standing against the oppression and fighting for the climate justice. So it's very important to stand in solidarity with them, because people united can never be defeated.
I love that. And that is one of my favorite chants. And I think we have the same sign behind us, which is end climate imperialism. Um, Emmanuel, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. So what I can say is, just because the other part of the world is flooded does not mean the climate change is not affecting you. So if there's flooding on the other side, there may be uh, radiation where you are. So you could get cancers. So it's all impacting us whichever way happen. The earth is connected. Water pollution, uh, diseases can spread all over. So any little indifference we bring into the planet would allow other species to perish, but there'll be other tiny living organisms that will thrive that we may not have developed immunity to that could wipe us out. It's just a matter of time. Anything can happen. How do we know that the coronavirus could be related to the environment? Nobody knows, but there could be a link to it. So I don't know. But what I can say is we have to just prepare because living things depend on each other. We're connected. That's how it creates a balance. But if you have other species, like I was shocked to see, like, I don't know, was it billion of wildlife species died in Australia? That's dry. It has never happened. But that is related to what are those wildfires? Mostly wildfires, there's always a balance. So there's going to be more wildfires in in uh, in other areas, maybe in California. So basically, my only question would be to ask here is, what's the best way for us to get the message out and for those people to see themselves this climate change, they're part of it.
Exactly. So often the climate crisis is portrayed as a problem of the future, something that isn't happening yet because it's not happening to the global north yet. It's not happening to the privileged yet, but it is already starting and it's already happening to the global majority in the global south, and that needs to be talked about. Barth, do you want to go next?
All right, thank you so much. I think as maybe a one word that I would like to address to everyone following this session is that we should understand that climate doesn't discriminate. You can be a refugee, you're not a refugee. Climate change doesn't discriminate. So what we need to do, we are supposed really to work together to mitigate the impact of climate change. So it's always, the responsibility of of everyone. Is you can be a citizen, you can be a refugee. Let's try to come up with solutions, with great new initiatives. We don't have to harm our environment. We are supposed to protect the environment. And for those who are already, being involved, those who are already, coming up with youth-led initiatives. So my call to action is just, to stakeholders to support us. So what we want like refugees to be included in the decision making process. Wherever there's any decision making process, we are supposed also to be part of it. Yeah, because there's nothing for people without the people. So we really need also, different training to get specialized on how we can act on climate change. And we once, many people should, come up with initiatives in planting trees, in, mitigating climate change so that we address these issues, so that we create a environmental where there's no the impact of climate change. So that's what I would like to address. And thank you so much, at least, for including us refugees in this platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Barth. It's us that has to thank you because, as we've been saying over and over, it is from the refugees, it is from the most marginalized people that we have so much to learn from. And as you said, it's empowering the youth and it's making sure that the most marginalized people have a seat at the table. So, Faith, do you have one more call to action for people?
I do. And I think so every time there's been a climate related disaster, humanitarians are the first ones on the ground, whether it's people who are hosting people who've been affected by that disaster or people who are hosting people affected by that disaster. But the international response that has been for many decades has been a humanitarian response. But this, I mean, as UNHCR, we're calling for a sort of a turn of the tide, such that funding is put more towards climate adaptation, so that we sort of break the cycle of humanitarian response every time there's a crisis, and invest more in helping communities, including refugees and internally displaced people, to become better prepared and better adapt to climate-related disasters. Because, as you know, my colleagues have already said, this thing is here to stay with us, and you know, it's everyone who's affected, whether you're internally displaced, whether you're a refugee, whether you live in the global north or the global south. This is a global emergency, a global crisis that requires all of us to pull our hands together. So what better way to protect each other, to protect us, than to help each other really adapt and better prepare for these disasters, instead of being at the other end of the rod. So that's really our call as UNHCR, that more investment now is needed on top of the humanitarian assistance. More investment is needed on the climate adaptation funding, and yeah, so that we're able to better adapt and better protect ourselves.
I completely agree. So often it is that humanitarian response, and that just goes to show how strong the community is and that communal spirit is, which is so important. But also, it's so important, again, to have more than that. It cannot be left there. That is why the youth climate movement, specifically Fridays for Future, has been calling for reparations from the global north to the global south, because this climate finance is so crucial, because we need first mechanisms to actually transfer this climate finance and to make sure that these climate finance doesn't come in the form of loans where global south countries end up in debt because of the climate impact and trying to adapt to it that was caused by the global north, which now we're in debt to because of the climate finance loan, right? So that is the kind of, I don't know, backwards, like it doesn't make sense that we need this climate finance to adapt to the climate crisis that the global north countries caused, and now we're going into debt because they lent us this money. So this isn't aid, or it isn't some loan. It is an obligation of the global north to the global south, so that we are able to adapt, so that we are able to manage the loss and damages that we've already experienced, and so that we can make sure that the most marginalized and vulnerable communities, such as the refugees and the internally displaced peoples, are protected and are safe. And I think in the end, climate justice is really just about that fight for peace, that fight for safety for everyone. And so we'd love to see you guys some more after this panel. You have everyone's names and information. And again, you can check out their social media at peaceoneday.org and follow them on social media so you can support more of their work and amplify their advocacies and their messaging. And I would like to thank everyone and to remind everyone that the climate justice is not just something about the environment and the extreme weather events. As Yusuf was mentioning earlier, it is an intersectional issue, and we need to dismantle all systems of oppression and injustice in order to achieve climate justice. So no peace, no climate justice. Thank you, everyone.